Good morning. Hey, thanks for joining us here today at CVC Coaching. And today we got another webinar we're bringing to you in recorded format. Today, man, I am so pleased. I'm honored. I got a new network partner of CVC Coaching here. His name is Krow. And what he is involved with is a company in the Pennsylvania area. And what they do is they are providing executives as independents. Patty Lawrence, who is one of the CVC chief financial officers that works independently with a lot of my clients, is part of Ed's company. Their company is Turbo Execs. And as you're looking at the screen, you can see the contact number, how to call Ed, and how to look him up on the website. Ed's got a tremendous background, and I'm going to call him a human relations expert. But the challenges people are facing today in business is, number one, how do we find the right people? Number two, how do we interview them? And number three, how do we stay within the legal ramifications? Because none of us want to be in trouble in the case of hiring, or if things go bad, well, we've improperly terminated someone and it comes back to haunt us later. So today I want to welcome Ed Krow, Turbo Exec. So Ed, how you doing today, my friend?
I am well, Jerry. Thanks for having me.
Oh, that is great. So let's start this off with a really good question today, Ed. Where do people find good people to come to work for them? And actually, I don't call it hiring. I prefer calling it recruiting. I want to recruit people to come to my team, and I want them to be members of my team. I'm not hiring for my company. I'm building a team. So, Ed, give me your advice on how we do that in the year 2015.
Well, you bring up a great point, and so often when I talk to folks who are, quote, the hiring manager, they believe that the great hire is found through placing an ad or through, just, hey, we're going to start interviewing folks. But it really has to start far beyond that, or before that, I should say. I'm a big believer that you find great people through relationships. And so the hiring, the recruiting process has to be just that. It has to be a process. It's not an event that, oh, gee, I just got 2 weeks' notice. I guess I got to run an ad. That's an event. Smart companies approach recruiting as a constantly evolving process, and they're always looking for good people. In fact, I've certainly seen successful companies say, you know what, we've got this great person that we've met. We don't really have an opening, but we can't afford to pass this person up. What can we do about this? And so I think that it really starts with the networking in the community. And some of the ways that can start is taking a look at your own really good employees. Where did you find them? Where are they coming from? Most times we see that good people hang out with other good people. And so that's one of the best places to start in a small company, is to talk to the people that get your vision, that are really a part of your team and are loyal to you, and talk to them about who they know, who might they want to bring in to be a part of this team. And if you have that sort of open relationship and communication, you'll find that you may not even have to run ads, because the word on the street will be that your company is a great place to work. And so that's where I think it has to start.
So where's some of the places that you build these relationships to find people? I mean, you got to start initially. So
sure.
If someone's going to say, okay, and I firmly believe like you, number one, if you are going to run a company today, you have to constantly be recruiting. Okay, that never ceases. Someone has to have ownership of that. So, but outside of the relationships, where do you see the successful hunting? Where do we find these people that our core values and theirs mesh?
Sure. Well, it's not in the newspaper. So, there's a place for running the traditional ad in the classifieds of the newspapers, but today's job hunter is so much more savvy than that. And you're going to find these folks, regardless of whether they're professionals, executives, frontline employees. So many folks are on networking sites like LinkedIn, like Facebook, like Twitter. and you can get information out on those mediums for free. You can't do that with the classifieds. And so part of the hunt, as it were, is not only you hunting for people, but getting people to want to hunt for you. And so as you build part of your brand, part of your mission and your values, and you start to communicate those out, assuming that most companies today are going to have maybe a Facebook presence or certainly a LinkedIn or a Twitter presence, you can use that as a medium to brand your organization and to communicate your values to the point that folks will start following you on those mediums. And so when you say, hey, we're looking to add to our great team, all of a sudden folks start saying, hey, well, what kind of skill set do you need? Because maybe I'm interested, because they already know something about your organization. The old idea of, hey, I placed the help wanted ad in the classified section, and I don't put my company name in there because I don't want anyone to know I'm hiring. Those days are so long gone. And someone who's still doing that is probably not. In fact, I'd almost go as far to say is guarantee that they're not getting the best people to respond to those types of ads. And in many cases, the networking, the folks you're going to hire that are really good are probably employed somewhere else. Now, I'm not saying you go out and you try and poach all your competitors' people, but that's the reality, is that good people are not necessarily sitting out there on the unemployment lines. Good people are also not necessarily looking for work. And so by using the social media tools that we have today, we can communicate who we are to people who may not even be thinking about making a move, but there's a compelling message out there, and we share that, and it intrigues people.
Hey, man, that is great information, and that's the kind of stuff that I think that people can really put to use. Now, one of my concepts, and I heard this concept a while back, was about employees have dreams. In fact, I've done some research on dream coaches, believe it or not, for employees. And one of the things Zig Ziglar always said was, if you help enough people get what they want, they'll help you get what you want. So it kind of follows the same format. So it's kind of like getting out there, and the really effective managers that I encounter, they're great visionaries, and they really want their people to get to a new level. So, that's kind of, how do you get that message out to people? What's the words that you would use to bring people, to catch their attention? Because what you're actually doing is you're developing, in my opinion, a marketing program, and you've got to market to the prospects. So what's some of the things that draw the interest of today's individual?
Well, if you look at the generational dynamics at play, one of the things that we know about today's workers, younger workers, is that they're very community-minded, they're very socially conscious, they certainly like to be part of something bigger than themselves. And so as you're looking to draw new talent in, again, focusing on this Generation Y, the 20-somethings, early 30s type folks, we need to be able to show how we're impacting our community, how we impact our customers. That's the message they want to hear. For them, it's not about, oh, how much can you pay me, so much as what's the bigger scheme here, and how can, by joining your organization, how can that help me grow as an individual? And so one of the compelling messages to draw talent in today has to be this idea of communicating out our company's value system. And again, I think that not only for a service industry is that a smart move for drawing new customers in, it's the same principle with drawing good people to your organization. We've always heard about this idea of, well, you got your A-list customers and your B-list customers and so on. You've got the same scenario going with potential employees in the marketplace. You've got your folks that you'll hire just because you need that warm body, which is not a smart business move. And then you've got the folks you say, gosh, I really want that person over there. How do I get them? Well, it's your compelling message, and do they identify with where your company is headed? And so, you can offer a great benefits package, a good compensation package. If the company's vision and that candidate's vision of who they want to be and who they want to work for don't mesh, the whole comp system seems to get thrown by the wayside. They may come and join your team for a little while, but it's not going to make for a long-term relationship. And so we've got to be able to communicate out that the same kind of things that we talk to our customers about with regards to why they should do business with us, those are some of the same messages we need to be communicating to potential recruits.
Yep. And that kind of comes into play because one of the things I've been advising my clients to do is to establish a place on their websites of we're looking for good people.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, what this says, it has two purposes. Number one is saying this is the individual we're looking for. Number two, it says we're growing, we're successful. And number three, it tells the client, the customer who may look at our website, hey, these are the kind of people that are going to be coming to my homes that I'm going to be doing business with. And from that standpoint, it becomes a marketing tool for sales, my opinion. How do you feel
Absolutely.
about that?
Yeah, I 100% agree, Jerry. I think that this, today's marketplace with the technology, the social media tools, it has really become a world of no shadows and no secrets. And so it really does have to all tie together, and smart companies have figured that out, that if we have a compelling message, we have a compelling product, a compelling service, we want to tell the world about that because that's how we grow our business. That's also how you grow a great team. Again, the candidates today are looking for the message they can get behind. And so if they see that you've got this compelling product and service, you've got rave reviews on your website from your customers, they're saying, hey, something good is going on with this organization, and maybe I need to find out a little bit more about this. And the smart company is doing the same thing on the customer recruitment side. They're talking about all the great things that their people are doing in the community, how they maybe went and volunteered for United Way, or they build a house for Habitat for Humanity. And now the customers identify with that and say, hey, wow, this is a company that I want to do business with. So it really becomes, quite a cycle of prosperity that one can now feed off of the other. And so I think that especially in the service industry where people are just so absolutely critical, who that person is that shows up at your customer's door is who's representing you. And so that person absolutely has to believe in the values and the mission and represent the company well, because they've got your company logo on in many cases when they're showing up at your customer's door. And so the process has to be tied together. And so when I look at even how we recruit and interview today, real fit is not just simply about can they do tasks A, Y, and Z anymore. It's can they live my brand and my vision.
And Ed, what you're saying is dead on the money. Me, myself, you, Patty, Michelle, and Michelle is another partner in your group.
Mm-hmm.
And what we all bring expertise to our clients. And one of my areas that I work with is sales. I work with sales. I work with operations procedures. Mm-hmm. But one of the things in sales that I teach in my classes, and it has really grown some companies with some pretty miraculous growth. In fact, Patty can verify this because she's seeing the finances of how Absolutely. These companies are growing. And what we're doing is we're teaching their people that the one product they have to learn to sell is themselves.
Absolutely.
So, but we have to have the right person. One of my concepts is the sale is often made in 90 seconds. And that 90 seconds is that first conversation on the phone, that when you knock on that door, in the eye contact, all these things come into play. So, I think we're so much alike in our thinking, it's unreal here. So in preparation for this, webinar, you and I bounced a couple ideas back and forth. But one of them is, how do we determine if the applicant has the right attitude? I'm going to call it the right core values. How do we determine it? And I know I brought up even that I had been recommending using personality testing to do this. So kind of give me your feeling on this part, because we're going to start delving into the actual interview questions and the process, which I feel is of utmost importance.
Right, right. Well, one of the big mistakes that folks make during the interview is they sit there with the job application or the person's resume, and they ask the basic questions. Well, where did you work before? And tell me about your last boss, and where do you want to be in 5 years? All those questions that have been just beaten into the ground for the last 20 years. And while it gives us a little bit of insight, it really doesn't help us to make a good hiring decision. Now, I'm not saying that you don't delve into some of those things. We certainly need to. We need to make sure that at a minimum the person is qualified to do the job. But there's a couple ways that we can answer that question and also answer whether or not this person is going to be a good fit. My style of interviewing is one called behavior-based. And so instead of saying, well, gee, Jerry, I see here on your resume that you sold. Tell me what you sold. And you'll say, well, I sold widgets to companies of this size. Well, okay, great, but that doesn't really tell me anything about you. Whereas if I say, well, Jerry, I see you've been in sales for a long time. Tell me about the toughest sale you ever had to make. Now, that's going to give me, as you answer that question, it's going to tell me a lot about your style, maybe your tenacity through the process, obstacles you had to overcome, all the natural sales objections that you had to deal with through the process. That one simple open-ended question tells me how you're going to react in a certain situation, and for good or for bad. The fact that maybe you made that sale is a good thing, but how you made it is going to tell me whether your style fits with the kind of style that I would want representing my organization. And so the basic principles of behavior-based interviewing are to look at how the person has reacted in the past in actual scenarios, assuming that they're going to react the same way in the future. People's behaviors tend not to change. And so behavior-based interviewing has been around for some time. It's not a new concept. And certainly within the HR community, it's used quite successfully. Outside of the HR community, in companies that may not have a dedicated human resources person, it's still sort of a novel concept. And so those sorts of open-ended questions start to give me a feel for who you are. Because the interview, in my mind, should not be an interrogation. It should not be me firing questions at you and you answering them. It should really be a discussion. And in order to be a really good discussion, I have to get you talking. And so these behavior-based questions will allow you to create a narrative for me. And one of the cool things with it is, let's assume that on paper it looks like you have 20 years of sales experience. And as I'm asking these various behavioral questions, you keep referring to the same sales event over and over again. Well, that last one I told you about. Well, here was what was unique about that. And you keep coming back to that. That tells me something too, that maybe your breadth of experience is not what it would appear to be on paper. And so there is so much that you can get from listening between the lines with this type of interviewing style. And you can certainly also paint a picture. I might say, well, Jerry, tell me about how you would handle this scenario, and I paint a picture for you. And maybe it's something that I've recently dealt with in my company, and I want to see how you would handle that. So it's not necessarily something you've done in the past, but now I'm putting you on the spot to say, wow, okay, let me think through this, and how might I want to handle this? And so this style of interviewing, the caveat is it takes longer. It's not the typical yes-no answer, drill you, and after half an hour I can make a hiring decision. This is probably an hour discussion at minimum. But you know what? I'm going to have so much information to work with. And the really cool thing that comes out of it is that at the end, you and I have a relationship. Regardless of whether you're the right fit for me or I'm the right fit for you, we've probably built a bit of a relationship after having a nice discussion with one another. And so, I don't think that the end game of any interview is for the candidate to get the job or for us to offer the job. I'm a big believer that the end game of an interview is to have a relationship starting. And where that relationship goes is up to us, because maybe you're not the right fit for me right now. Doesn't say in another year or two you won't be. And so I think if folks approach the interview process that, hey, my only goal here is to build a relationship with this person, not to find my next candidate for hire, but to just build a relationship, it gives you a much different perspective on the process, and it forces you to ask different questions as a result of that being the end goal.
From listening to you, Ed, I would say that one of the major mistakes many people make in the interview process is they're really not prepared for it. They're really approaching this, and they're considering it actually a pain in the ass. Because they come in, they've got things going on, they cannot devote themselves into this, and then it results in failure. And, so what I'm hearing you say is a company has got to put together, I'm going to call it an SOP, but they've got to build a process. And like I said, you can't do this in an emergency case. You've got to think this thing out and have your process together. So, one of the things I asked there, but what about the personality testing, the computer-generated personality? What's your feelings on this?
I am a big believer in it with a few caveats. One is that you have to have the right assessment. They are a dime a dozen out there, and they all have their place, but some of them are much better than others, and they are truly a case of you get what you pay for. And so there are a number of providers that I've dealt with that I absolutely believe in their product because of what it tells us about the individual. The old, one of the oldies but goodies is the DISC profile. It's kind of a 4-quadrant profile. There's something to be said for it, but we're into second, third, fourth generation assessments now that can tell me so much more about an individual and how that person would relate based on the position you're hiring them for. And so, whether someone's an introvert or an extrovert, well, who cares? It's how do they manage that in themselves, and how does that apply to the job? That's where the money, the bang for your buck really comes in. And so the second caveat is that I see too many organizations that use personality assessments that they become the decision point. Well, gee, I kind of like Jerry, but his personality assessment really didn't come back all that good, so I'm not going to offer him the position. Well, wait a minute. You're telling me you're trusting a piece of paper over the discussion you had with the candidate. Is that really, if you were a good judge of people, is that really a smart move to make? And I've seen the opposite true probably more often, where you and I didn't necessarily hit it off in the interview, but you aced your personality profile, and therefore I ought to hire you. No. So I see using these profiles as one more club in your golf bag, right? That you're not going to use a personality profile necessarily every single time for every single position, but they can tell us a heck of a lot about a person that may not come out in an interview. And so, for me, I look at it and say, okay, you could spend, say $7,500 on a reasonable assessment and get some good information out of that. And that's money well spent. I mean, sure, it's money in the hiring process, and for someone who's on a tight budget, they might say, wow, I just can't do that, and that's understandable. But then my response is, well, how much does that poor hire cost you, though? How much time and effort do you put in to hire the wrong person, and 6 months later they leave or you have to fire them, and now you're hiring again for the same position? So it's one of those things that we have to say, do I want to invest in the process and be proactive, or do I want to stay in this reactive mode where I'm constantly trying to put fires out? Where do we break that cycle? And so, when we're looking at changing our recruiting process to some of the things that you and I have discussed so far and throwing in a personality assessment, I think it comes down to, is the money spent, is the couple of bucks we have to spend to get this additional good information, does it make sense for our business? I think that rather than seeing it as a cost, we have to look at it just like, and analyze it just like we would an advertising opportunity. Would I run an ad in this forum because it's going to get me good customers if I do it? So if I spend $100 on the ad, I know I'm going to get several thousand back in business. Well, that's a very smart ad to run. Same thing for investing in a personality assessment. If I'm going to get a solidified candidate and make me really feel at ease about making a job offer to this individual because of what comes back on the assessment, then that $100 was very well spent. It's saving me a lot of money in the long run. So, in short, yeah, there's some great tools out there. I advise my clients to use them. We've used them in our firm as we've looked at growing because Turbo Execs is very big believer in personality assessments. And in fact, the three principles of us, we've all taken numerous assessments and shared them with one another because it helps us to be much more effective as business partners.
Yep. And I think, something, Ed, you just hit a bullseye in what you were saying a minute ago. You hit the bullseye because you brought up the fact of what is the cost of an improper hire? What is the cost of a hiring failure, I'm going to call it? Well, we hire someone, we bring them in, and now it doesn't work. And we're in the middle of our busy season. And, and people have seasons in their business. And a day in June is not nearly as valuable as a day in October. So what we've got to do is, and again, it's like in the seasonality of the business, we've got to have our team built, ready to go. This is the investment you've got to put into building your business that makes it all important. I mean, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for honesty. I'm looking for a person that can be a problem solver. This is big. I mean, so many people cannot solve a problem, and then the supervisor becomes what I call the crutch. And they're working on problems all the time, and their people could solve this to where instead of working on problems, the manager starts to work on the business and build the business to the next level because the people are solving the problem. One of my concepts is I believe in the silent office. And when I say by the silent office, nobody has to ask someone else a question because they know what they're doing, because they were trained, they've got the processes, the procedures to follow. And that way it turns you loose and ignites you to work on the business. That's what's great about a team. And that's what we're talking about. So let me ask you this. What's a great document, a great source to develop these kind of questions for an interview? Where do people go for this kind of help, Ed?
Well, there are a couple of documents that are going to surprise your listeners. So the first and most obvious is, do you have a good job description? Okay. Now, there's no surprise there that you should use that as part of your hiring tool. But if that document is not on your desk during the interview, something's wrong. And if that document hasn't been provided to that candidate who shows up, they're there for the interview, the first thing that whoever greets them should do is say, hey, thanks for coming in today. Take a look at this job description. We'll call you back in a few minutes, but we want you to be fully aware of what the job is. That prepares that candidate to answer anything specific that's going to be asked. You're going to get better questions, better answers to your questions. Better yet, if you have a way to get that job description into that person's hands electronically ahead of the interview, even better for the process. Second, and this is one that most people never think of, but the second document that should be on your desk when you're interviewing is your performance management tool. It's one thing for me to sit and interview you and have you answer all these great behavior-based questions that I've designed, but then I need to take it a step further, and I need to say, all right, Jerry, here's how we're going to hold you accountable to do your job. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about, I'm going to hire you to do sales for me, and your goal is to sell $100,000 in business this year. let's look at how we're going to lay that out. So now my behavior-based questions are starting to steer towards your actual performance. And there could be something in there that you say, oh, gee, I wasn't expecting that. I don't think I can do $100,000 in sales. Maybe this isn't the right fit for me. So if we can let people know what they're going to be held accountable for and ask questions around that, we start to solidify the entire process. I had a situation with a gentleman who was coming into a consulting role and was a very solid professional. And as we were chatting with him, and he went through a number of us in the firm, we decided, you know what, this guy's great. He's got the knowledge we're looking for. But several times during the course of the interview, he said, I don't consider myself a good salesperson. I don't think I'd really fit that. I'd like to do the work, and I think I can build a great client relationship. So we had to really think that through, because we wanted someone who not only was a good practitioner, but could go out and sell the services that we were offering at that point in time. So he was not going to be a good fit, despite the fact we all liked him as a person. He had the right personality to fit to our team. He certainly came with the right level of experience and knowledge. But when we started talking about how he was going to be measured from a performance perspective, that was not what he was expecting. And so he kind of deselected himself from the process. And that's okay, because had we brought him in, as nice of a guy as he was, it was not going to work out in the long run. And so having part of the interview centered around how you're going to measure the person's performance and the things they're going to be held accountable for is another wide open door of information you're going to get from someone. And so what I tell folks that are new to this idea of behavior-based interviewing is to look at those two documents, your job description, your performance management tool, and think about the types of scenarios that the person in the role you're hiring for is going to face on a daily basis. Maybe it's actual client scenarios you've been dealing with or business challenges you've got, and design those questions around that. Think to yourself, well, what would I want to know about that situation, and design the question around that. There are certainly some generic questions you can pull down off the web. If you type in behavior-based interviewing, you'll get all kinds of general questions, and they're a great place to start until you get better with the process. And again, a good HR professional is going to be able to coach you through those types of things as well.
Ed, from hearing this, and what I think people are thinking right now, that's a lot of work, Ed. But
yes, it is.
As a coach, that's what I hear. My God, Jerry, that's a lot of work. Well, yeah, it is. And this is why we got to have the team that's doing it. So as managers, we can work on the business to develop these kind of things. Because what I've seen is once you start putting this phenomenal team of people together, all of a sudden, your job gets easier.
Right.
So does it involve some work? I think we both got to say, yes, it does.
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah. There is no free lunch here, folks. If you want to be a successful business owner and manager, there's some work involved. There really is. And this is the working on the business that goes back to the E-Myth, working in you can't just work in it. So, right. Ed, tell me about an open-ended question. What do you mean when you say in our discussions we talked about the open-ended question? And I know where you're going, but explain to me what people need by an open-ended question.
Well, you just asked one. It's a question that cannot be answered with yes or no. So if I looked at your resume, Jerry, and I said, well, it looks like you've got 20 years of sales experience, you're probably going to say, yes, I do. Well, what did I learn from that question? Absolutely nothing that I didn't already see from your resume. But if I go back to a question that requires a lengthy response, that's open-ended. It allows you, as the person answering me, to take that question wherever you want it to go. And a good interviewer should do much less of the talking. We talked about this process being a discussion, but we should be doing the bulk of the listening. And so, I might have half a dozen open-ended questions I'm going to ask you, and I'm willing to bet that's going to take us over a half an hour to get through those half a dozen questions. Because if I ask the type of question that's going to require you to give me insight, it's going to take you some time to formulate your thoughts and to paint this picture for me. And so, a great example for the folks listening of open-ended questions are the exact kind of questions you've been asking me. You've used terms like, well, tell me about, what do you think about? Just even how we start a question can determine whether it's open-ended or not. And so generally, there is a place for close-ended questions, and I'll give you an example. I may need to look at you and say, Jerry, the hours of this job are 8 to 5. Can you be at work at 8 o'clock every day, and are you available till 5 o'clock? And I need to hear you say, yes, Ed, I can do that. Or, no, actually, I rely on public busing, and so, can I start at 8:15? But in the big scheme of things, those closed-ended questions, those yes or no's, to me are limited only to some of the critical elements of the job. Can you lift 50 pounds? Because that's a big requirement here. Yes, Ed, I can. Okay, perfect. We check the box on that one. Can you be at work every day at 8 o'clock? Yes, I can. Check the box. So those are the types of closed-ended questions that we use to just sort of check the box on the basic pieces of the job to make sure that we've got someone here who, at a minimum, can do the absolute basics of the job. But after that, we need to get into the open-ended questions. And the reality is, if we have a good job application, that should have the bulk of the information on it from the candidate that will keep us from having to ask many close-ended questions because the basic information is right there.
Ed, I'm going to tell you something. Your expertise is in human relations. Mm-hmm. And I feel like my expertise is in operations, sales, like we talked about earlier. But an amazing fact, and something you just said, is a skill that I teach in sales, and you just described the exact same skill, which is the skill of listening. I teach people in my sales classes. I'm looking for listening, and listening skills means more than just what you hear. I want to observe the looks on their face. I want to observe the emotion. I want to observe when they're getting frustrated, which is not being said. A lot of times it's simply from the expressions on their faces. I tell a lot of people, if in a sales process, one of your goals is to make your client smile, because once they smile, you've made a tremendous headway in the sales ability. So it's amazing that the hiring professional is a salesperson in a way, because that's what we're doing. So
absolutely.
Let me ask you now, and I'm going to go a little bit farther into this, because we're all concerned about legalities these days. We're all concerned about sexual harassment suits, minorities, all the facts of the world in which we operate business today. It's a different world. So tell me what a job-appropriate question is, and give me an example of an appropriate and an inappropriate question.
Okay. Appropriate question would be, tell me about the types of professional organizations you're involved with. You might say, well, gee, I'm a member of the local Kiwanis Club or Sertoma, or I volunteer with the Boy Scouts. Those types of things are what I'm hoping to hear out of that, because the key word there is professional organization. Okay. Now, it's certainly possible someone might say, oh, well, I'm a youth minister at my church, and I'm this and I'm that, and okay, that's nice information. It's not necessarily something we need to hear per se, but there's nothing illegal about that. Illegal question, gosh, there are a ton of those. Gee, Jerry, tell me where you worship on Sundays, or maybe you don't. Tell me about your family. Tell me what activities your kids are involved in. These might all seem like innocent questions, and kind of for the most part they are, until we use them to determine whether or not this person should be hired. And the reality is that those questions I just asked you, I might be asking just because I want to get to know you, and I want to get to know you as a person. The problem is they are completely irrelevant for how well you can do your job. And so when you look at questions that start to get into that, quote, illegal realm, there are any questions that don't have a bearing on the job. So if I say, gee, Jerry, tell me about your kids, what does that have to do with you selling my product or my service? Nothing. And I've had business owners argue, oh, well, I need to know that this guy or gal is going to be committed. And, if they've got kids, that's going to get in the way of them working all kinds of crazy hours and being on call and doing the things they need to do. No, that's your opinion, Mr. Business Owner. That may not be the reality for this individual. And so that's where folks get themselves in trouble, is that they allow their personal views to get in the way of, they're looking for someone who will mirror their own personal views. And that's not, certainly if you have a generational difference with the person that you're interviewing, you're going to bang your head against the wall trying to find someone who shares the same views as you. And so we have to steer our questions to something that's job related. If I say, Jerry, can you get to work every day by 8 o'clock? Perfectly legitimate question. I got to have you here, right? If I say, Jerry, how are you going to get here? There's a big difference there, because maybe I'm biased against someone who relies on public transportation. Well, why? As long as you can be at work by 8 o'clock, I don't care if you swim, ride a bike, take the bus, as long as you can be here. And so, there are questions that folks tend to think they're just innocent questions. Oh, gee, I'm just asking. I want to make sure they've got a car. Well, why? You're on a bus route. What difference does it make? I've had people say, well, I want to make sure that they've got to drive my company vehicles. Okay, but where in there does that say they've got to have their own vehicle? All they need is a valid driver's license. And so, we could spend the next hour talking about this question of legal versus illegal interview questions. But where we tend to get ourselves in trouble is where we get, I guess how I put it is, get too friendly during the course of the interview. I think your personality has to come through. I think you have to be a genuine person. But it is an interview. This is a business situation. And so we need to, if it starts to get too friendly, that tells me that maybe the questions are getting a little too personal.
Okay.
And maybe getting a little bit away from, let's stick to the job and the criteria for the job.
Okay. Let me ask a similar question. And what we were talking about there was getting to know the person and their personal habits or whatever, or family, other things, and that's marginal. What about on the side of disabilities? I've been to a seminar, and a gentleman presented that you couldn't ask if someone could climb a ladder, because that would be a violation of the Americans with Disability Act and discriminatory hiring. What can you ask as far as disability or physically able to do the job type of questions?
Okay. Wow. I'd like to have a chat with the gentleman that said that. If you are a roofer, clearly one of the things you better be able to do is climb a ladder. How are you going to get to the roof? And so that could certainly be a what we call bona fide occupational qualification. In other words, if you can't do it, regardless of whether you have a disability or not, I can't hire you for the job. And so there are absolutely certain physical questions that I have a right to ask and that are perfectly legal of me to ask, so long as they are, again, bona fide occupational qualifications. And that's the government term. In layman's terms, it's the things I got to have you be able to do. Now, let's say that I can climb the ladder, but I have a 20-pound lifting restriction. So I'm never going to be the guy who's going to be able to sling the shingles over my shoulder and climb the ladder with them because it's too heavy. A reasonable accommodation might say, well, you know what, I could still add Ed onto my team. The other guy's just going to have to lug the shingles. Once he's on the roof, he's good to go. He just can't carry, the weight around. But I've got to know that up front. So I've got to be able to ask him, Ed, can you lift 50 pounds? Because the boxes of shingles weigh 50 pounds. If I say, no, I'm on a 20-pound weight restriction, but if I have some help or this, I can do the job. Now, as the business owner, I can make the decision, is that what we call a, quote, reasonable accommodation to make? To have one guy on a crew who maybe can't lug the shingles up the ladder. So, yes, we can ask questions related to a person's physical ability so long as that's directly related to the absolute essential functions of the job. If climbing a ladder is not an essential function of the job, if it's something that happens once every 2 weeks, and there's other guys on the job that could climb the ladder to clean the gutter or whatever the job happens to be, you still might be able to hire me even though I can't do ladder work.
I understand. Like I said, and I'm hopeful that the gentleman that made that statement may be listening to this when we released it. Because like I said, this is part of it, and that's why I like on my team professional expertise in my network. Because like I said, we can bring the right things. What about in the case of we have an employee and their physical condition changes after they come to work due to something that was not job related? We could give an example of, we have someone who has developed a disabling condition because of something on their own, and they can no longer do the job. It could be it could be any number of things. They play softball and they got hurt, and now they cannot physically do their job. It could relate to, we all know that maternity leave comes into effect, and we're going to face a decision that, can this person, we're going to have number one, a time frame, but number two, we've got child care issues that were never encountered before. So how does an employer deal with these type of things? Because these are issues that people have in the people.
Right. And now we get into that murky gray area of human resources. And I'm going to talk in very general terms because I have to recognize that we've got folks listening from all over the U.S. I certainly cannot quote every single state law that's out there on the topic of disability and things. And then you get into whether the folks that are listening are large enough that they have to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Family and Medical Leave Act. So in general terms, let's assume that they have to comply with those federal laws. And they have that employee, like you said, that sliding into second base, breaks an ankle, they're going to be out of work for 2 months. If they have to comply, if they're large enough to comply with Family and Medical Leave Act and ADA, then they can't fire that person because they can't come to work for 2 months because they're guaranteed their 12 weeks of medical leave. However, if you're not large enough to have to comply, then you have a tough decision to make. Do you put this person on sort of an inactive status because they're a great employee and you want them back? And if in 8 weeks they're going to come back to full health, you may want to do that. Where the challenge comes in is that person's never going to be in full health. They had to get pins in their ankle, and now they can't do the ladder work. And the ladder work is a thing that a person on your team cannot avoid doing. Now we're in that situation where perhaps we may have to make a tough decision where they can't meet the essential functions of the job any longer. And we may legally be able to terminate them, though they are disabled, because they can no longer meet the basic functions of the job. So what I will caution our listeners on is, don't take what I've just said and run with it. These are things that it truly is. We've got to look at the facts of every situation, the state you're in, the size of your organization, the facts of the situation before we can make a definite decision over whether, or what course of action we should take with something like that. So this is something you want to be very, very careful with if you want to avoid legal problems down the road. Okay, so you said something a while ago, and that involved a number. What is that number? You said number of employees. What is that number, Ed? Generally, it's 25 employees is where we to see at the federal level. Again, some states have different thresholds for the size of organization that has to comply with different laws. And so, I'm speaking just from the federal level at this point.
Correct. So I am assuming that, just like we have expertise, I also know that legal expertise is specialization. So if someone had a question such as this, what would be the expertise or specialization they should look for to consult an attorney in their state?
Well, I think that the challenge for most folks is finding an attorney who is an employment law attorney. And, just like anybody else, you and I have our areas of expertise, and outside that, we may know a little bit of some other pieces of the business, but we have our areas of expertise, and attorneys are no different. And so you may have an attorney who's your general business counsel, and you call because that person's helping you form your company and your company's bylaws, those kinds of things. But if that attorney does not have specific expertise in employment law, you need to find an attorney that does, because employment law is a very ever-changing type of discipline. And I've actually seen folks get bad advice from their attorney on employment-related laws, because it's just not what they deal with. So you need to be very careful in selecting a really good attorney there. You can find a great HR consultant, and one of my definitions of a great HR consultant is one who knows the difference between giving sound business advice and delving into the realm of legal advice. Oftentimes my clients will call me and say, Ed, is it legal if I do such and such? Can't answer that. I'm not an attorney. Let's talk HR. Let's talk best practices. Let's talk interpretation of the regulations. But can't guarantee it's legal. Only an attorney can do that. So, if you're talking to someone who's not an attorney and they say, oh, yeah, that's legal if you do that, run the other way.
Got you covered. And, that's key that I tell a lot of people. A lot of times in industry discussions, I'll start listening and I hear someone giving others legal advice. And I've got a corporate attorney that works here with me, and he works with some of my clients. And we've come up with a real, one of the things is the attorney who, the legal counsel who looks at himself for counsel in the case of a lawsuit has a fool for a client.
Yeah.
Because even attorneys go to other attorneys if they get sued. They don't try to represent themselves in court. So let me ask you another question.
But Jerry, let me before we go into that another question, I wanted to clarify your previous question over numbers of employees, because I want to make sure that folks understand this one.
Okay.
If we're talking about in terms of the Americans with Disabilities Act,
okay,
it's the 25 employee mark.
Okay.
If we're talking about the Family and Medical Leave Act, which is the guaranteed time off due to sickness or health conditions, it's 50 or more employees. So there's two different thresholds there, and I wanted to make sure that we made that clear for the listeners.
Sounds like a winner to me. Well, that's good. So I'm talking to somebody. I'm interviewing. I'm getting excited. It looks like the right guy. What's the circumstance I say, hey, you're the best qualified for the opening? When do you say that, and where can that get you in trouble, Ed?
Okay. You don't say it in the interview. If you're saying that in the interview, where you run into challenges are a couple of different areas. Let's say that you want to do that, a personality assessment like we talked about earlier. You don't have the results of that just yet. You should be running some kind of criminal background check on the individual. You don't have those results yet. And so, maybe you're doing drug and alcohol screening pre-employment offer. Okay, pre-job start. Okay, you don't have those results yet. So I'm a big believer that when you're closing the interview, I might say, Jerry, we had a great discussion today. Obviously, I've got some other candidates that I need to interview, and I need to weigh all of your qualifications out. I will be in touch with you in X period of time and let you know what next steps are if we decide to move forward. That leaves it open. I'm not making you any promises at that point in time other than, hey, give me a couple of days, a week, or whatever, and I'll follow up with you. That's how every interview should end. Because let's just say for a moment that I do say to you, Jerry, this was a great interview. I don't see any problems with getting you hired. You go back to your current employer and you give notice. Now, I haven't officially offered you the job yet, but you decide, hey, this sounds really great. I want to be able to start for Ed as quickly as I can, so I'm going to give my 2-week notice. 2 weeks goes by, you haven't heard from me. And you call me and you say, hey, Ed, you basically told me I had the job. And I say, Jerry, I decided that I'm not going to fill that position. Now, you've already given notice. You just might, and I underline might because now we're getting into the legal realm, you might have a case against me for breach of contract if you can prove that we had a verbal contract that I was going to hire you. So we have to be very careful in what we say at the end of the interview. And I will say to the listeners, and this is, again, it's another step in the process, but I think that every job offer you make has to be in writing. It has to spell out, I'm going to hire Jerry. He's going to earn $50,000 a year. He's going to get 2 weeks of paid vacation. It spells out all the pieces. His work week is Tuesday through Saturday from 9 to 5. Everything is in there. And I mail that to you, and I say, Jerry, if you accept these terms, please sign off and send it back to me, and then we'll agree on a start date. That way, there's zero room for error. So if at the end of the interview I tell you this is how my process works and things, and we'll be in touch, there's zero room for someone to walk away thinking they have a job that they really don't have yet. And it helps us to avoid you showing up, getting your first paycheck, and saying, well, wait a minute, I'm supposed to earn $50 a year, and if I total this up, I'm only earning $40. Something's not right here. So again, most folks probably that are listening are not making written job offers, and they're thinking, gee, here's just one more thing this guy wants us to do. But I think it's one more thing that helps you to avoid troubles down the road. And I'm a big believer that I will invest the time up front to eliminate the fire down the road.
And I'm in full agreement. Well, let's keep on with the question, because I got another one here. A lot of times if we meet someone, we may invest in, shall we call it, small talk.
Sure.
Can this get you in trouble? Is there questions you can ask in the small talk that could actually be a real headache later on?
Yeah. So, common one. So let's say you're interviewing, it doesn't matter, male or female, and they're wearing on their left ring finger what would appear to be a wedding band. And you saying, oh, I see you're married. Tell me about that. Problem, I might genuinely just be curious about you. But here's what could happen. Number one, it doesn't have anything to do with the job. But what happens when that person says, yes, my partner and I, my same-sex partner and I went and got married. Now you've got some information that you probably didn't want to hear. Definitely has no bearing on the qualifications for the job. But based on your agreement with or disagreement with same-sex marriage, that may bias you to this candidate. That's where we get into the real dangers. And you can argue, let's say you don't hire the person, and they go off and say, well, he didn't hire me because I'm homosexual. Well, okay, there's no federal law yet that offers that as a protection, but many states do. But the reality is you didn't necessarily care, but the questioning went that way. And so, yeah, I think there's a place for small talk. Gee, it's a sunshiny day. You got to love a gorgeous day like this. Yeah, okay, something like that. But or maybe I walk into your office, or I happen to be wearing a shirt with my favorite sports team on, and you say, oh, I see you like such and such. Those kinds of things, they're innocent, not going to have a bearing on things, and might be enough to put the person at ease. But when we think about small talk, the kinds of things that, maybe we're at a mixer or a cocktail party and we might talk to somebody about, that might be okay in that setting because we're just trying to get to know someone on an individual level. Probably not appropriate in the business interview environment.
Okay, sounds great. So I'm going to keep on. Part of this is legal interviewing, legal questions, not that you're asking, but how to stay out of trouble. This is part of what we're talking about here. So what about the questions? Do you have to ask all applicants the same questions?
Interesting. So that's a yes and no for an answer there. And the reason I say that is yes from the standpoint that you should ask all of your candidates the same questions that are 100% related to whether they're qualified for the job. No from the standpoint that each interview is kind of going to go where it's going to go. And so once I know that you meet the basic qualifications for the job, in other words, we've gone down the can you be at work at 8, can you lift 50 pounds, or whatever the other things are that are crucial to the job, now I'm going to ask those behavior-based questions that are going to sort of meander, just like a stream. It's going to meander along our discussion. And so the key is not that I'm able to check off that I asked every single person every single question. It's that I didn't profile people. And what I mean by that is, let's say I've got 5 candidates coming in, and I have 3 guys and 2 women of those 5 candidates. And the guys I ask very basic questions of, and the women, I don't ask the guys, but I ask the women, can you lift 50 pounds? Now, here's a situation where what on paper seemed like I'm assuming the guys can and the women can't. That type of not asking everyone the same question is where you're going to get into hot water. Because if the women leave and they're starting to compare notes, and maybe some of the guys are, and this happens, especially if you're in a small town, people know each other, and they're like, oh, well, he didn't ask me if I could lift 50 pounds. And they start to figure out that, well, he's only asking the women that. That will definitely show a bias against females. And you're making assumptions that a female is not physically able to do the job. Meanwhile, you're making the assumption that all guys can lift that kind of weight. So that's where, if you're not asking all the same questions, it's going to get you in trouble.
Got you covered. So the next one is going to involve, we're still on and this is part of the record keeping we've got. But, you know what legal discovery is. This is where an attorney can call, you can send a letter or a demand for notes and other things that you would have in your files. And in the legal industry, that is called discovery, where they can send a demand letter and you have to produce these records. So can your notes that you take during an interview, like if you're writing down something and we'll say that it's inappropriate, it could be geared to misconstrue, violation of law or whatever, is this a problem?
Oh, absolutely. There are things that you're going to notice about the individual that may have no relevance on the job. I've seen, and I'll use some examples. I hope our listeners can appreciate the fact that these are real life examples. But I've seen things where one hiring manager has written on the application and then forwarded it to the next person. Check out what this candidate's wearing. Her legs go, why would you write that down? Why? First, it has no bearing on the job. And second of all, this is creating a trail. Now, in this particular situation, this female wasn't hired. She sued based on gender discrimination. She won. And based on some of the questions they were asking, she realized, hey, wait a minute, they're only asking this because I'm a woman. And, through discovery, and I'm working with this company trying to comply with this, and I'm looking at these notes saying, guys, you better just settle because this is ridiculous what I was reading that they were writing down. I mean, those kind of comments, keep to yourself. You might say, something like, this person is not a good fit for us. Okay, that's fine. And you may write down, person said, person talked about a certain scenario. I did not like how they handled that scenario. Again, that's fine. It's where you get into the crazy opinions, the observations that might show bias. That's what really gets you in trouble with your notes. So I think you need to take notes, especially if you're interviewing any number of candidates. You want to be able to go back a day or so later and be able to digest the information. So what you're taking notes on should be relevant to the interview and to the job that you're hiring for. But those kind of things like what someone's wearing, what he or she looks like, or, oh, gee, they came in with a particular religious symbol on, don't think they're going to fit here. Those are things that are going to get you in trouble if you have to go through some sort of discovery.
Hey man, that is great. Well, listen, Ed, this has been a very enlightening time for me. I've picked up some really great tidbits today. So like I said, that's what all this is about. And one of the things is it's like with my clients, which are small business,
Mm-hmm.
that you can't, these people don't need full-time expertise on staff, okay?
Right.
Small companies don't need a full-time HR person, and that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of where what I've tried to do is find people that we can network with to bring in this expertise. So let me ask you something. And
Mm-hmm.
what would be kind of your closing comments to add to this conversation today? What would you like people to know and kind of carry forward from this time they spent with us?
Well, I think it sort of goes back to some of our opening discussion, that not just from the hiring perspective, but when you're looking at your company's brand, there's a concept out there of not just your brand from a service or product standpoint, from your consumer's point of view, but you have an employment brand as well. And we need to work hard on our employment brand just like we work hard on our consumer brand. And what that does for us is, as we mentioned at the beginning of the session, it certainly helps us to recruit much better people in. But if we have an excellent employment brand, it helps us to hold on to the good people as well. There's an old adage that 80% of your problems are probably caused by 20% of your people. So the more that we can reduce that 20% of problem people, the more time we start to free up, as you put it, to work on our business instead of putting fires out constantly. And a good employment brand can help us with that. And a good employment brand really comes back to developing that relationship. I mean, the employment relationship is pretty basic, right? I offer a great package to my employees in exchange for their time and their efforts, and they're getting results for me. And as long as that relationship is in balance, we've got a great employment brand. It's when one of those things starts to get out of balance where we start to run into problems. And so having a great employment brand means that we're not only recruiting the best in because they want to be part of our team, it's that our people are saying, this is a great place to be. I've got it pretty good here. I'm going to hang out here because this is a great organization, and I feel like I'm taken care of in measurable quantity with how much I give back to the organization.
Well, Ed, I just want to let you know I'm really, really thrilled that I've gotten to know you and I'm able to call you a network partner. I hope you feel the same way from your side.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Well, here's the question I got to ask you. Somebody needs your expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I tell them, Patty, hey, the best thing I can tell you to do is email her, set up a time, and get acquainted. So, kind of see what they need. So my question to you, if somebody sends an email to Ed at turboexecs.com, say, I'd like to set up an initial meeting just to talk with you to see if you can help me. What are you going to charge them for that, Ed?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah. I think, I don't want someone to be thinking the whole time we're chatting and getting to know one another, oh, gee, how much is this costing me? Because the reality is that when you're talking about HR stuff, you need to be really comfortable with the person who you're going to work on any project with, because you're going to bear a lot of your company's soul, much like some of our listeners have done with Patty. They're bearing their financial souls to her, so they've got to be very confident and comfortable that not only is she going to help them, but she's going to keep the information confidential and that sort of thing. Well, the same is very true for a human resources person. I mean, we're going to deal with some sensitive issues potentially. And so that person has to feel not just confident in my ability to help them, like we talked about with a good candidate, but they've got to feel comfortable in dealing with me as an individual. And so, there's certainly times in fact, I tell all my prospects, during our initial meetings, hey, look, this is a bit of an interview. I think I'm the best guy to help you with your situation, but you have to be comfortable with me in building our relationship together.
Right.
Because if we can't do that, the relationship's probably not going to work the way we'd like it to work.
Right.
And so, yeah, I don't think, personally, anyone who's charging for an initial consult, I'd be wary of.
Well, that's kind of like, and what we're doing in these initial calls to each other or emails, I've got to feel comfortable with a client. Do you agree you have to feel a comfort level before you take a client?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there's certainly, folks that I've said, hey, I'm just not the right guy for you.
Yep.
And a lot of that comes back to not because they're not nice people, maybe the vision's off. You see that at probably a lot of your listeners every now and then might tune into Shark Tank. And one of the common things that I see that, these sharks, they might really like the business, but they'll say, I'm not the right person because I don't share your vision. And to me, that's important, that this has to be about both of us saying, yeah, we see the vision, we can help one another, and we could really enjoy working together. I mean, I'm very proud that when I look at my clients, I consider so many of them friends. I've had them for so long. I know what's going on in their lives and the businesses, and that's what drives me professionally. Is that relationship, and I guess that's what makes me a true HR guy. Is that personal connection that we get to the point where I may go to a client meeting and we spend a bunch of time sitting there shooting the bull and catching up on family and friends and what's going on. And then we say, oh, gee, I guess we better start talking business. And so for me, it's got to be that kind of great relationship. Otherwise, it's a drag for both sides.
Oh, it is. It really is. When you and I and Michelle and Patty had our initial talk the other week, that was kind of like we were all talking. That's why we did that call, to get to know each other, know where we're at.
Absolutely.
Well, let me throw this out. Let me throw this out to everybody that's listening. So you're aware, Turbo Execs and CVC Coaching is entered into a joint venture. And the joint venture we're going to do is training general managers, CEOs, operating officers. In other words, what we're putting on in September of this year will be the initial rollout of this. We're putting on a week-long class. And in this class, what we're going to have is Ed will be one of the people with his expertise, and as you've just heard, very knowledgeable. You've heard us talk about Patty. Patty, she's phenomenal in the financial world. Michelle is another partner, Michelle McCall, and she is the person that is an independent chief executive officer, believe it or not, and feels a need there and has expertise. And these great people have even allowed me to participate, which is, these guys are on a level up here I'm trying to get to. But anyway, all together, what we're going to do in Hershey, Pennsylvania in September is we're going to do a week-long training. It's not going to be for a large group. We're going to limit this. It will be a small group. It'll be 1 week of training. And we're going to follow that up with group coaching after the training. And our goal is to build strong, growing, exuberant managers of businesses with all the skills that we can drive into them. We're going to drill down on what it takes to be successful. Ed, what's your thoughts about this thing that we're going to do?
Well, I'm excited about it. I think that you're going to be hard pressed to find a better team in place. In fact, I was sharing this with a gentleman just last night, when we were putting together, and he said, people need this. And he said, Ed, the value of the follow-up coaching alone is huge. And I think that, there are so many good training programs out there where you get great content, but where they fail is in the follow-up piece, where the folks leave the classroom training, they get back to the real world, and then they get stuck. And so what we're going to offer to the attendees with the follow-up coaching will help to continue their development after they leave the week-long session. And that's where, as a training guy, that's where the real learning occurs. It doesn't occur in the classroom. It occurs in the application of the knowledge from the classroom. And so, the fact that we're offering our attendees the ability to continue to connect with us through the ongoing coaching after the training is really where they're going to see the results.
I think it's going to be an answer, and it's going to give people skills that it's going to be phenomenal and where they can go. You know, what I've noticed in my coaching career, and since I've entered this and doing educational stuff, I mean, my passion, my drive, where my reward is when I see people reach their dreams.
Amen.
When you see this and you sit back and the satisfaction to myself, and I think all of you guys share the same, is sitting back and watching. They've reached that dream. And that was the goal we come into it. It really is. Well, Ed, I'm going to tell you what, today has been phenomenal for me. I hope you've enjoyed it from your end.
Oh, it's been a great time.
Yep, I'm glad that I was able to ask you some open-ended questions and see where you could go. And I hope that's helped you guide this. So, folks, if you want to get to know Ed, you're seeing his phone number. I'm going to ask you to do this. Send him an email, because a lot of times you get somebody on the phone, it's like you just don't really have that time. But if you'll email Ed at turboexecs.com, look up on their website, turboexecs.com, and then Ed can set up a time to talk to you. Like I said, there's no charge for that. It's free. And the whole principle here is to see if he's right for you, you're right for him. It may be a simple project you're working on. It could be whatever. But just imagine that you can bring to your company a little piece of an HR professional that can guide you to build that team. And that's what we're doing together. His job is to help you find and keep everything working good. My job is to coach you and them to go to where you want to do. It's Patty's job to, hey, we got to check the finances. And then we watch how it grows and it grows. And, that's why this whole network thing that I've developed with my network partners, Turbo Execs, Direct Connect Solutions, Spark Marketer. Man, I feel like a race car sometimes, Ed. It's got all these different, you ever watch a race car with all the stickers on it, all the people involved? That's kind of how I feel right here. So give us a call. This is Jerry Eisenhower, CVC Coaching. Ed, I want to thank you one more time for being with us today. Folks, this is hung on YouTube. Feel free to watch it again. I think there's tremendous value that's been shared with you today. And let us know it always here at CVC Coaching how we can help you turn your business dreams into your business realities. Let's make dreams happen and let's make them real. I thank you for the time. It has been an honor. It's been a privilege to present to you today. And I look forward to talking to you next time. Have a great, great day and a great